The wrench slipped from Roy's greasy fingers and clanged against the metal floor. He cursed under his breath and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Bay 7 of Orbital Station Gamma 7 had a busted cooling system, which meant working in conditions that felt like a furnace. Most mechanics refused assignments down here. They claimed the equipment acted strange, that tools went missing, that something felt wrong about the place. Roy thought they were all idiots. Machinery broke down. That was life in space. Nothing supernatural about it. He crawled deeper under the damaged freighter hull, his headlamp cutting through the darkness. The ship had clipped an asteroid 3 days ago and needed 16 separate hull patches before it could fly again. The owner was some Valtorian trader who kept sending angry messages about lost profits. Roy ignored them all. He worked at his own pace, did quality repairs, and went home to his tiny quarters every night without drama. That was how he liked it. Something caught his eye near the coolant tank. A spherical object wedged in the narrow gap between the tank and the wall. Roy frowned and reached for it. The thing was about the size of a melon, smooth and dark with strange patterns swirling across its surface. It was also warm, oddly warm for something that had been sitting in a freezing cargo bay for who knows how long. He pulled it free and turned it over in his hands. The weight shifted strangely inside, like liquid moving through chambers. Definitely not a standard ship component. Maybe some kind of decorative item from the trader's cargo. Roy checked his datapad and pulled up the manifest from 3 weeks ago when the Valtorian ship had last docked. The files were corrupted. Half the entries showed up as garbage text. Roy tucked the object under his arm and finished his shift. 6 more hull patches completed, 10 to go. He would deal with the mysterious sphere back in his quarters. If it was valuable, he could sell it at the station market and finally afford to replace his broken comm unit. If it was trash, well, at least it was interesting trash. His living space was barely large enough for a bed, a small desk, and a storage locker. Roy had been working on Gamma 7 for 2 years and had no plans to leave. The pay was decent, the work kept him busy, and nobody asked questions about his past. He set the sphere on his desk and stared at it while eating a ration bar that tasted like cardboard. The patterns on its surface seemed to move in the light, probably just the way shadows fell across the curves. Roy poked it with his finger. Still warm. He lifted it again, feeling that strange weight distribution. Something was definitely inside this thing. An egg, maybe? But from what kind of creature? He fell asleep with questions buzzing through his mind. His dreams were vivid and strange. He soared through clouds made of colored gas, feeling wind that didn't exist rushing past his face. Stars blazed around him, so close he could reach out and touch them. Fire filled his lungs, but didn't burn. Instead, it felt natural, like breathing was supposed to feel. He dove through a nebula and roared with joy that echoed across empty space. Roy woke up drenched in sweat. His quarters were unbearably hot. The temperature gauge on the wall showed 42 degrees Celsius. The climate control system had completely failed. He stumbled to the panel and tried to reset it, but nothing worked. The sphere on his desk was glowing now. Faint lines of light traced those swirling patterns, pulsing like a heartbeat. He grabbed his comm and called maintenance. They said they would send someone in the morning. Roy opened his door to let cooler air flow in and sat on his bed, watching the sphere. The glow was getting brighter. Hairline cracks appeared on the surface, each one leaking more light. This was not a decorative object. This was a live HFY morning. The cracks had spread across the entire surface. Roy hadn't slept. He had spent hours researching every database he could access through the station's network. Most of what he found was useless, but buried in an old archive from the Coalition era, he discovered a reference to something called Dracora, dragon-like beings who had disappeared from the galaxy 600 years ago. Their eggs were said to bond with a single guardian, creating a connection that lasted for life. Roy stared at the sphere. No way. Those were legends, stories made up to scare children or inspire loyalty to the old government. Dragons didn't exist. Sentient dragon creatures who bonded with other species definitely didn't exist. This had to be something else. Maybe some rare animal from a distant world. Maybe even a biological weapon. Either way, he was in over his head. He tried to report it to station security, But Commander Yelv, the Centurion administrator who ran Gamma 7, barely listened to his explanation. Yelv was preparing for trade negotiations with some merchant fleet and had no time for what he called a mechanic's overactive imagination. Roy's supervisor told him to focus on finishing the freighter repairs and stop bothering command staff. Beth, the only other human mechanic on the station, met him for lunch in the crowded cafeteria. She listened to his story while picking at a bowl of something purple and gelatinous. When he finished, she leaned back and shook her head. Take it to the xenobiology lab. If it's really an egg, they'll know what to do. They're closed all week for equipment upgrades. Then I guess you're stuck with it. Beth grinned. Maybe it'll hatch into something cute. You could use a pet. Roy didn't think cute was the right word. The sphere pulsed with warmth against his side where he had hidden it in his jacket. He could feel it like a second heartbeat, sinking slowly with his own. Something was watching him from inside that shell. Something ancient and powerful. Something that had chosen him, though he had no idea why. That night, everything changed. Light exploded through Roy's quarters like a supernova contained in a small room. He jerked awake, shielding his eyes from the prismatic brilliance that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sphere on his desk had split open, pieces of shell scattered across the metal surface. Something moved in the center of the light, something small and alive. Roy's heart hammered as he approached. The light faded gradually, revealing a creature no bigger than a house cat. It had scales that shifted colors as it moved, reflecting blues and purples and silvers like oil on water. For legs, ending in delicate claws. Wings folded against its sides, translucent membranes with veins of gold running through them. A long tail that curled around its body. And eyes. Those eyes locked onto Roy with an intelligence that made his breath catch. They were deep and ancient, filled with starlight. The creature made a sound, something between a chirp and a purr. It took a shaky step toward him, stumbled, and collapsed on the desk. Roy reached out instinctively, catching the tiny dragon before it could fall to the floor. The moment his skin touched those iridescent scales, the world shifted. Emotions flooded his mind. Hunger, confusion, fear, but also relief and a desperate need for comfort. These weren't his feelings. They belonged to the creature in his hands. Roy gasped as the connection solidified, as if someone had wired his brain directly to another consciousness. He could feel the dragon's exhaustion, could sense how much energy hatching had taken. The little creature looked up at him with absolute trust. Alarms started blaring. Station sensors had detected the massive energy release. Roy heard boots pounding in the corridor outside. He barely had time to wrap the dragon in his jacket before his door slammed open. For security officers in full armor burst in, weapons raised. The dragon panicked. Roy felt its terror spike through their connection. Before he could react, a pulse of energy exploded from the small creature, knocking 3 of the officers off their feet. Their weapons clattered to the floor. The 4th officer raised his rifle, finger moving toward the trigger. Roy stepped between them. Don't! Move aside. That thing is dangerous. She's terrified and just hatched. Look at her. Does she look like a threat? Roy held the jacket open slightly, revealing the trembling dragon inside. She's a baby. The officer hesitated. His rifle stayed pointed at Roy's chest. Command needs to see this. Now. They marched Roy through the station corridors like a criminal. People stopped and stared. Word was already spreading through Gamma 7's gossip networks. By the time they reached the administrative level, a small crowd had gathered. Roy kept the dragon hidden in his jacket, feeling her fear pulse through their bond. He sent back what he hoped were calming thoughts. Easy. I've got you. You're safe, Doctor. Ishin was waiting in Commander Yelv's office. The elderly xenobiologist took one look at Roy and the bundle in his arms, and her eyes went wide. She whispered something in her native language that Roy's translator didn't catch. Yell was less impressed. The Centurion administrator looked at Roy like he had brought something disgusting into his pristine office. Explain this situation immediately. I found an egg in Bay 7 3 days ago. It hatched tonight. I don't know what she is, but she's bonded to me somehow. I can feel her emotions. Dr. Ishin approached slowly, her hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "May I see her?" Roy unwrapped the jacket carefully. The dragon lifted her head and chirped at Dr. Ishin. The old scientist's face showed a mixture of awe and fear. She turned to Yelv. "This is a Dracora. They were thought extinct for 6 centuries. If I'm correct about what has happened, this human and this dragon have formed a life bond. It cannot be broken. The Dracora choose their partners, and once chosen, they are linked until death. That's impossible. Those creatures are myths." "Clearly not." Dr. Ishin gestured at the dragon. "The energy signature from the hatching matches historical records. The bonding symptoms this man describes are consistent with ancient texts. Commander, this is perhaps the most significant xenobiological discovery in modern history." Yelv rubbed his forehead. "This is a diplomatic nightmare. Do you have any idea how many factions would want to possess a living Dracora? We're in neutral station. We can't be seen harboring something this valuable." "She's not property," Roy said quietly. "And I'm not giving her up. That's not your decision to make." Dr. Ishin held up a hand. "Actually, it is. The bond cannot be broken without killing both parties. Any attempt to separate them would result in death for the Dracora and severe psychological trauma for the human. The bond strengthens over time. Within days, they will be unable to function apart." Roy felt the dragon's attention shift from Dr. Ishin back to him. She pushed her small head against his chest, and he understood what she wanted. Food, water, rest. The needs were simple and immediate. He had no idea how to care for a dragon, but through their connection, he could sense what she required. It was strange and overwhelming and somehow felt completely right. "What do I feed her?" Dr. Ishin smiled. "Come with me. I have some supplies in the lab that should work for now." "Commander, I recommend you restrict access to this information. If word spreads beyond the station, we will have problems." Yelv waved them away with obvious frustration. "Fine. But this human is now your responsibility, Doctor. Keep that creature contained." Roy followed Dr. Ishin through the corridors, ignoring the stairs and whispered conversations around them. The dragon rode in his arms, her small body radiating warmth. Through their bond, he felt her curiosity awakening as fear faded. She was looking at the world with fresh eyes, taking in colors and sounds and the press of people around them. "What do I call you?" Roy thought. The dragon turned her head and looked at him. For a moment, he felt something like amusement through the bond. She didn't have a name yet. That would come later. For now, she was simply his, and he was hers. Doctor Ishin led them into her lab and sealed the door. She prepared a mixture of proteins and minerals while explaining what she knew about Dracora physiology. They grew fast. They were highly intelligent. They possessed abilities that humans could barely comprehend, and through the bond, Roy would gain access to some of those abilities. But there was danger too. Many factions in the galaxy had hunted the Dracora to extinction. If certain people learned that one had survived, they would come. Roy looked down at the dragon in his arms. She was already falling asleep, exhausted from her first hours of life. He could feel her dreams beginning to form, could sense the deep genetic memories stirring in her mind. She carried the knowledge of her ancestors, the history of a species thought lost forever. "I'll keep her safe," Roy said. "Whatever it takes." Dr. Ishin nodded slowly. "I believe you will try, but you should understand what you're facing. The Dracora were not killed by accident. They were hunted systematically by forces that still exist in this galaxy. Forces that will not hesitate to destroy anyone who stands in their way." 2 weeks passed like a fever dream. Roy's life became a constant juggling act between his repair duties and caring for Ash. He had named her that after watching her accidentally set a maintenance rag on fire while learning to control her breath. The dragon grew at an alarming rate, doubling in size every few days. She was now as large as a medium dog, her wingspan reaching nearly 2 meters when fully extended. The bond between them deepened in ways Roy hadn't imagined possible. He could sense her presence anywhere on the station, like a warm light at the back of his mind. Her emotions had become clearer, more complex. She understood human speech now, though she communicated back through mental images and feelings rather than words. When Roy was frustrated with a difficult repair, Ash would project calming sensations through their link. When she was excited about something she discovered, his own mood lifted automatically. But the changes went both ways. Roy found his reflexes had sharpened. He could sense energy flows in ship systems without looking at diagnostics. Once, he had dodged a falling tool before he consciously registered the danger, as if Ash's danger sense had warned him through their bond. Dr. Ishin called it symbiotic evolution. The bond was changing them both on a fundamental level. The political situation had deteriorated quickly. Ambassador Quilvin of the Mercantile Assembly had arrived on the station demanding that Roy surrender Ash for scientific study. The ambassador claimed the dragon was too important to remain in private hands, that she belonged to the galaxy as a whole. Commander Yelv had ordered Roy to appear before a council hearing, but Dr. Ishin had helped him avoid it by claiming Ash was too volatile to move safely. Security teams followed Roy everywhere now. They claimed it was for his protection, but he knew they were monitoring him. Yelv wanted to confiscate Ash, but was terrified of the diplomatic consequences. The station's neutrality was its most valuable asset. Making the wrong move could destroy decades of careful political balance. Beth met Roy in one of the lower observation decks, a quiet spot where few people ventured. Ash lay curled at Roy's feet, her scales shimmering in the starlight that streamed through the viewport. Beth sat down carefully, keeping distance between herself and the dragon. "I've been doing research," she said quietly, "about what happened to the Dracra. Dr. Ishin already told me they were hunted." "Yeah, but she didn't tell you who did the hunting." Beth pulled up a datapad and showed Roy a series of old documents. 600 years ago, there was an empire called the Sovereign Collective. They controlled about a third of known space. The Dracora-bonded pairs were working as peacekeepers, helping species communicate and resolve conflicts. The collective saw them as a threat. Roy scanned the documents. Most were heavily redacted, but enough remained to paint a grim picture. They killed them all. They tried to. But here's the thing. The Sovereign Collective still exists. They're not called an empire anymore. They rebranded as a security coalition. They run protection services for dozens of systems. They have influence, resources, and a long memory. Ash raised her head and looked at Beth. Through their bond, Roy felt the dragon's unease. She was picking up on Beth's worry, processing information from her genetic memories. Images flashed through Roy's mind. Ships burning, dragons falling from the sky, bonded partners executed in the streets. These were memories passed down through generations, stored in Dracora DNA like a warning. "If they find out about Ash, they'll come," Roy said. "Not if. When." Beth closed the datapad. "News is already spreading. You can't keep something like this secret on a trading station. Every merchant ship that passes through carries gossip to a dozen other systems. I'd give it another week before someone with collective connections hears about it." Roy felt cold despite Ash's warmth beside him. "What do I do?" "Run. Get off this station before they arrive. Find somewhere remote where you can hide until Ash is fully grown and strong enough to defend herself." "How long will that take?" "According to Dr. Ishin's research, about 6 months. Dracora mature incredibly fast compared to most species. But 6 months is a long time to stay hidden when people are hunting you." Ash moved closer to Roy and pressed her head against his leg. Through their bond, he felt her determination. She wasn't afraid. Or rather, she was afraid, but willing to face that fear if it meant staying with him. The trust she placed in him was absolute and terrifying. He was just a mechanic. He fixed broken ships and tried to mind his own business. Now he was responsible for the survival of an entire species. The decision felt too big for one person to make. But looking into Ash's starlight eyes, Roy knew he didn't really have a choice. She had chosen him for reasons he still didn't fully understand. Walking away would kill her. Maybe not physically, but it would destroy whatever made her unique. The bond was everything to a Dracora. Breaking it meant breaking themselves. "I'll need a ship," Roy said, "and supplies. Enough to last 6 months in deep space. I can help with that." There's an old transport in Bay 12 that nobody uses anymore. The owner died 3 years ago, and his family never bothered to claim it. It's still registered and fueled. I can get you access codes. What about Dr. Ishin? She knows this is coming. She's been preparing documentation about Dracora care and development. Everything you'll need to help Ash grow safely. She wants to come with you, but at her age, living on a small ship for 6 months isn't realistic. Roy nodded. His mind was already shifting into planning mode. He would need to reprogram the ship's transponder, plot a route through systems with minimal collective presence, and gather enough food for both himself and a rapidly growing dragon. The logistics were daunting, but at least it was something concrete he could focus on. Ash projected an image into his mind. The two of them flying through space together, her wings spread wide enough to catch solar winds. It was beautiful and impossible. Dragons didn't fly through vacuum, but through the genetic memories she carried. Roy understood that adult Dracora could survive in space for short periods. They could create protective fields of energy around themselves and their bonded partners. When Ash was fully grown, they wouldn't need a ship at all. 1 week, Roy said. We disappear in 1 week. Beth squeezed his shoulder. I'll have everything ready. Just be careful. Station security is watching, and I guarantee Yelv has people monitoring your communications. They parted ways carefully. Roy returned to his quarters through a maintenance tunnel that Ash had discovered, one that bypassed the main security checkpoints. The dragon was learning the station's layout faster than he was, her ability to sense energy signatures letting her map the entire structure in her mind. That night, Roy couldn't sleep. He lay in bed with Ash curled beside him, her warmth radiating through the thin blanket. Through their bond, he felt her dreaming. She soared through nebulas and danced among stars. She hunted solar winds and sang songs that made comets change course. These were the dreams of her ancestors, the life she should have lived in a galaxy that hadn't tried to destroy her kind. Roy made a silent promise to the sleeping dragon. Whatever happened, wherever they ended up, he would make sure she got the chance to fly free someday. Not as a curiosity or a weapon or a political tool, just as herself. That was worth running for. That was worth fighting for. Outside his viewport, stars wheeled slowly through their ancient dance. Soon, those stars would be his only home. The sleek Corvette docked at Gamma, 4 days before Roy planned to leave. He was doing a routine inspection on a cargo lifter when he felt Ash's alarm spike through their bond. She was back in his quarters, supposedly sleeping, but something had triggered her danger sense. Roy dropped his tools and our AN.B by the time he reached the residential level. A crowd had gathered near the main docking port. A man stood at the center of attention, tall and confident in expensive clothing that marked him as someone important. He had the easy smile of someone who always got what he wanted. Roy recognized the type. Wealthy hunters who tracked exotic creatures across the galaxy for sport and profit. Beth grabbed Roy's arm and pulled him into a side corridor before he could be spotted. That's Sci-Fi Realm. He's famous in certain circles. If something rare exists anywhere in known space, he finds it and brings it back, usually in pieces. He's here for Ash. Probably. His ship has collective markings under the independent registry. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Roy's hands clenched into fists. Through his bond with Ash, he could feel her panic building. She wanted to come to him, but he pushed back calming thoughts. Stay hidden. I'll handle this. The dragon reluctantly settled, though her anxiety continued to pulse at the edge of his awareness. Sci-Fi Realm made his presence known throughout the station over the next hours. He visited shops, bought drinks for merchants, and told entertaining stories about his hunts. He claimed to be investigating illegal animal trafficking, tracking down smugglers who dealt in endangered species. Everyone who heard him thought he seemed reasonable and professional. Roy knew better. Men like Rand were predators who dressed up their hunting in civilized language. The confrontation came during Roy's shift in Bay 7. He was replacing a power coupling when Rand appeared at the entrance, his smile bright and friendly. 2 associates flanked him, trying to look casual, but their eyes constantly scanning for threats. Roy Hendricks, I am Shivoran. Could we talk for a moment? Roy kept working, not looking up. Busy. I understand you've made an incredible discovery. A Dracora, if the rumors are accurate. I'm prepared to offer you 10 million credits for her. Enough to buy your own ship, settle on any world you choose, live comfortably for several lifetimes. Not interested. Rand's smile didn't falter. I sympathize with your attachment. The bond between human and Dracora is supposed to be quite profound. But consider the bigger picture. I represent organizations that can study her properly, ensure her species survives. One dragon in hiding helps no one. But one dragon in the right hands could lead to a breeding program, to bringing the Dracora back from extinction. Roy finally looked up. The collective killed them all in the first place. Why would I trust you to bring them back? The smile faded slightly. You've been listening to conspiracy theories. The sovereign collective today is not what it was centuries ago. We've evolved. We protect species now instead of exploiting them. Tell that to the Vren. Oh wait, you can't. The collective wiped them out 15 years ago. Rand's expression went cold. The Vren were violent extremists who threatened civilian populations. But I'm not here to debate history. I'm offering you a fortune. Take it and walk away while you can. And if I don't, then I'll file seizure papers. I have legal authorization to confiscate dangerous, unregistered organisms. You have 24 hours to accept my offer or surrender the dragon to authorities. Either way, she's mine. Rand left with his associates, his footsteps echoing in the empty bay. Roy's heart pounded. 24 hours. They were supposed to have 4 more days to prepare. Beth's schedule for reprogramming the transport required at least 2 more days of work. The fuel cells weren't even fully charged yet. Ash's fear crashed through their bond like a wave. Roy sent back every ounce of determination he could muster. We're leaving tonight. Be ready. The dragon's response came as a mental image of her standing beside him, wings spread, ready to fight if needed. Pride mixed with terror in Roy's chest. She was barely 3 weeks old and already willing to die defending their bond. He found Beth in the central marketplace, buying supplies under the cover of routine shopping. She took one look at his face and understood immediately. How long? We leave in 6 hours. Can you finish the reprogramming? If I skip safety checks and hope nothing explodes, maybe. What about Dr. Ishin? I'll get her documentation and say goodbye. That's all we have time for. They split up and moved quickly. Roy went to the xenobiology lab and found Dr. Ishin preparing data chips. The old scientist had known this moment would come. She pressed the chips into Roy's hands along with a small medical kit. Everything you need is here. Dietary requirements, growth milestones, emergency procedures. The bond will guide you through most situations, but having reference material helps. Her eyes were sad. I wish I could see her reach maturity. It would have been remarkable. Thank you for everything you've done. Take care of her. She represents hope for her entire species. That's a heavy burden for one human mechanic and one young dragon, but I believe you're capable of carrying it. Roy made his way back to his quarters through maintenance tunnels. Station security had increased patrols, but they didn't know about the service passages that Ash had mapped. He found the dragon pacing anxiously, her scales flickering with agitated colors. The moment he entered, she pressed against him. Seeking reassurance, they packed light. Clothing, tools, data chips, and the few personal items Roy cared about. Everything fit in 2 bags. Ash watched him work, projecting questions through their bond. Where are they going? How long would they run? Would they ever be safe? Roy had no good answers for any of it. Beth's message came through on his personal comm. The transport was ready, fueled, and reprogrammed. Bay 12, docking port 7. She had created a digital trail, suggesting Roy was working a late shift in Bay 3. It would buy them maybe an hour before security realized he was gone. They moved through shadows and in used corridors. Ash had learned to suppress her energy signature, making herself nearly invisible to sensors. The skill came from genetic memory, an adaptation her ancestors had developed during the purges. Roy felt sick thinking about generations of Dracora learning to hide just to survive. Bay 12 was dark and empty. The transport ship looked like junk from the outside, its hull pocked with micrometeorite impacts and discolored from years of solar radiation. But Beth had done good work on the interior. Life support hummed steadily. The engines responded smoothly to startup commands. Navigation systems came online and displayed nearby star charts. Ash climbed into the co-pilot's seat and looked at Roy expectantly. Through their bond, he felt her excitement mixing with fear. This was an adventure. This was also running for their lives. Both things could be true at once. Roy's hands moved across the controls, following procedures he had learned years ago. The transport lifted smoothly from its dock and turned toward the bay doors. Behind them, alarms started blaring as station security finally realized what was happening. Commander Yell's voice came over the comm, demanding they return immediately. The bay doors opened. Stars waited beyond. Roy pushed the throttle forward and felt the transport surge ahead. Weapons fire lit up behind them as Rand's Corvette launched in pursuit. Ash roared, her first true dragon sound, and Roy felt power surge through their bond. Energy surrounded the transport like a shield, deflecting shots that should have torn through their hull. They jumped to hyperspace with Rand's ship seconds behind them. The chase had begun, and Roy had no idea where it would end. But looking at Ash, seeing the determination in those ancient eyes, he knew they would face it together. That was what the bond meant. Not just sharing minds and emotions, but sharing fate itself. The transport ship shuddered as another impact struck the rear shields. Roy wrestled with the controls, trying to coax more speed from engines that were never designed for combat. Ash stood braced in the co-pilot's seat, her consciousness reaching out through space to track their pursuer. Through their bond, Roy could sense Rand's Corvette like a cold presence behind them, gaining steadily. Fuel reserves dropped toward critical levels. They had jumped 3 times in 4 hours, each time hoping to lose their pursuer in the vastness of space. Each time, Rand had found them within minutes. His ship had better sensors, better engines, and better weapons. They were outmatched in every way that mattered. "We can't keep running," Roy said aloud. Ash's agreement resonated through their bond. She was showing him images from her genetic memories now, teaching him things her ancestors hadn't known. Dracora didn't run from threats. They faced them, but she was still young, still learning to control her abilities. A direct confrontation with Rand would be suicide. Roy checked the navigation charts. One system nearby showed promise. The Borderlands, a region of space beyond collective authority where refugees and outcasts built colonies from scavenged ships and hollowed asteroids. It was lawless and dangerous, but that meant no one would ask questions about a human with a dragon. If they could reach it before Rand destroyed their ship, they might find sanctuary. He plotted the jump and felt Ash's approval through their bond. The dragon was projecting images of her parents' final memories now. A desperate flight through hostile territory, searching for safe places to hide eggs before death came. The parent Dracora had known the species was ending. Every egg placed was a desperate hope that someone worthy might find it someday. Roy hadn't been chosen randomly. The egg had been programmed to respond to specific qualities: compassion, protectiveness, the willingness to fight for something other than yourself. The jump to the Borderlands nearly tore their ship apart. They emerged with warning lights flashing across every system. Hull integrity at 40%. Life support failing in 3 compartments. Engines operating at half power. But they had made it. A sprawling collection of colony ships and modified asteroids hung in space before them, lit by the dim light of a dying red star. But a comm signal came through immediately. "Transport vessel, this is Refuge Point Traffic Control. State your business or turn around. Requesting emergency docking. We're damaged and being pursued." Silence for a long moment. Then a different voice, older and more authoritative. "Pursued by whom?" Cyver ran. "He's working for the Sovereign Collective." More silence. Roy held his breath. Finally, the older voice spoke again. "You're cleared for emergency dock, Base 17. We'll handle Rand if he follows you here. Director Oren wants to speak with you personally." They limped into the docking bay and touched down with a shudder that suggested the landing gear might not work a second time. Roy and Ash emerged into a cavernous space filled with ships in various states of repair. People stopped and stared at the dragon. Some raised weapons nervously. Others simply watched with a weary acceptance of people who had seen too many strange things to be truly surprised anymore. Director Oren was a scarred woman with gray hair and eyes that had witnessed atrocities. She looked at Ash for a long moment, then at Roy. A Dracora. I haven't seen one since I was a child serving in the collective fleet. I watched them hunt your kind down and execute bonded pairs in public squares. It's good to see one survive. You were collective. Past tense. I defected 20 years ago after I was ordered to fire on a refugee ship. Been running this place ever since, giving people a home when they have nowhere else to go. She gestured at Ash. Your dragon can stay here safely. Ran won't dare attack Refuge Point. We're too well defended and too unimportant for the collective to risk open conflict over. Roy felt relief wash through him and realized half of it was coming from Ash. The dragon was exhausted from maintaining energy shields during the pursuit. She needed rest and food and time to grow. Over the following weeks, Roy learned the rhythms of life in the Borderlands. Refuge Point was home to thousands of refugees from dozens of species. They had built a functioning society from salvage and determination. Roy found work repairing ships and helped improve their defense systems. Ash grew rapidly, her body adding mass every day as she finally received proper nutrition. The bond between them deepened further. Ash could now speak into Roy's mind with clear thoughts and complex ideas. She shared genetic memories of the Dracora civilization at its height. They had been peacekeepers and diplomats, using their bonds with other species to bridge communication gaps and prevent conflicts. The collective had seen this as a threat to their expansion and systematically hunted them down over the course of decades. But Ash revealed something else through those memories. More eggs existed. Her parent hadn't been the only Dracora to hide offspring before dying. Throughout the galaxy, other eggs lay hidden in forgotten cargo holds and abandoned stations, waiting for the right people to find them. Ash believed the eggs responded to specific individuals, drawing them in through subtle energy emissions. Roy hadn't found her by accident. She had called to him. Director Oren visited often, fascinated by Ash's development. The old woman told stories of the Dracora she had known as a child before the final purges began. They were magnificent and terrifying if you were their enemy. A fully bonded pair could disable a warship single-handedly. The collective feared them because they couldn't be controlled or corrupted. The bond made them immune to bribes and threats. You can't leverage someone who values their partner more than their own life. Roy understood that now. Through the bond, he and Ash had become something greater than two separate beings. They were partners in the truest sense. Her strength was his. His determination was hers. When they moved together, they operated with perfect synchronization. Training began under the guidance of Refuge Point's defenders. Ash learned to control her energy projection, to create shields and focused blasts. Roy learned combat techniques and how to channel Ash's power to enhance his own physical abilities. Through their bond, he gained reflexes that bordered on precognitive. He could sense attacks before they came, his awareness extending through Ash's perception of electromagnetic fields and energy signatures 0.3 months passed in relative peace. Ash reached the size of a small spacecraft, her wingspan nearly 30 meters. She could fly through vacuum now, creating an energy envelope that protected both herself and Roy. They practiced flight maneuvers among the asteroids, learning to move as one entity. Then the sensors detected incoming ships. Multiple contacts, military configuration, bearing sovereign collective markers. They hadn't come in stealth. They wanted Refuge Point to know they were coming. Roy stood on the command deck with Director Oren and watched the fleet approach. 12 ships, including Rand's corvette in the lead position, that a transmission came through. Rand's voice, cold and professional. Refuge Point, you are harboring stolen property belonging to the Sovereign Collective. Surrender the Dracora and its human within 1 hour, or we will take it by force. This is your only warning. Director Oren looked at Roy. You don't have to fight. We could try to negotiate, buy you time to escape. Ash's presence filled Roy's mind. She was done running. So was he. Through their bond, he felt her readiness, her confidence in their combined strength. They had trained for this. More than that, they had evolved for this. The bond had changed them both, made them into something the collective hadn't seen in 600 years, a fully realized Dracora pair, ready to fight back. Roy met Director Orn's eyes. Tell Rand if he wants her, he'll have to go through me. Ash roared, the sound echoing through the command deck. Through her consciousness, Roy felt other presences stirring. 3 signatures, faint but growing stronger. Hidden somewhere in Refuge Point, 3 more eggs were responding to Ash's call. 3 more chances for the Dracora to return. 3 more partnerships waiting to be born. The fleet drew closer. Ash spread her wings. Roy checked his flight suit and weapons. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That was what it meant to be bonded. Not just sharing a mind or emotions, but sharing destiny itself. The hour passed in tense silence. Roy stood in the launch bay beside Ash, running final checks on his flight suit. Around them, Refuge Point's defenders prepared for battle. They had fought off pirates and raiders before, but never a collective fleet. Everyone knew the odds were bad. They fought anyway because that's what people did when they had nowhere left to run. Ash's consciousness brushed against his mind, calm and focused. Through their bond, Roy could sense her mapping the battlefield, tracking each ship's position and energy signature. She had grown so much in 3 months. Her scales had deepened to a rich purple-black that seemed to absorb light. Her eyes blazed with intelligence that came from both her own growth and centuries of genetic memory. She was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, the calm crackled. Rand's voice, cold with certainty. Your hour is up. Last chance to surrender. Director Orn's response was equally cold. Refuge Point doesn't surrender to tyrants. If you want war, we'll give you one. The first shots lit up space like fireworks. Refuge Point's defense batteries opened fire while smaller ships launched to harass the collective fleet. Rand's forces responded with overwhelming firepower, their advanced weapons tearing through shields and armor. 2 defender ships exploded in the first minute. 3 more took critical damage and retreated. Roy and Ash launched together. The moment they cleared the bay, everything changed. The bond opened fully, their consciousnesses merging until Roy couldn't tell where he ended and Ash began. He saw through her eyes and his own simultaneously. He felt her power flowing through him, enhancing every thought and movement. They moved through space like a single organism, dodging weapons fire with impossible grace. Ash projected an energy shield around them both, turning aside shots that should have killed them instantly. Roy targeted Rand's corvette with his modified weapons, scoring hits against their rear shields. The collective ships turned to pursue them, exactly as planned. Draw their attention away from Refuge Point's vulnerable defenders. Then Roy felt it. 3 new presences blazing to life in his awareness. Through Ash's consciousness, he sensed the other eggs hatching. 3 refugees, people who had been living in Refuge Point for years, suddenly found themselves bonded to newborn dragons. The connections formed in moments, guided by instinct and genetic programming. The hatchlings were tiny and helpless, but their presence changed everything. Rand felt it too. His transmission cut through all other channels. Multiple Dracora signatures detected. All ships converge on Refuge Point. Destroy the station before they can mature. The collective fleet changed tactics, focusing all firepower on Refuge Point's core habitat sections. They were going to kill everyone to ensure the dragons died. Roy felt rage surge through him, amplified by Ash's fury. This was what the collective had always done. Destroy anything they couldn't control. Ash dove toward the lead battleship, building speed until they became a streak of energy across space. At the last moment, she unleashed everything she had. A focused beam of pure power that punched through shields and armor like they were paper. The battleship's reactor detonated, taking 2 nearby frigates with it in the explosion. But there were still 9 ships left, and Roy could feel Ash's exhaustion. That attack had taken enormous energy. They couldn't do it again. Not yet. More defender ships launched from Refuge Point. Roy recognized director Oren's personal fighter among them. The old woman was leading a desperate charge, trying to draw fire away from the habitat modules. She nearly succeeded. A collective destroyer locked onto her ship and fired. Roy and Ash moved without thought, pure instinct driving them. They positioned themselves between Oren and the incoming missiles. Ash's shield expanded to cover both ships. The missiles detonated against the barrier in a blaze of light and force. The shield held, but barely. Roy felt Ash's pain through their bond as the effort nearly overwhelmed her. Then something unexpected happened. The three new hatchlings, guided by their bonded partners, began projecting their own shields. The energy was weak and uncontrolled, but it was there. Four Dracora working together, even with three being newborns, created a defensive network that covered Refuge Point's critical systems that Rand's corvette broke formation and accelerated toward Roy and Ash. Personal vendetta overriding tactical sense. He wanted the dragon that had started all of this, and he wanted her dead. His ship's weapons blazed, pouring fire into Ash's shields until they began to crack. Roy felt Ash's determination surge through their bond. She was done defending, done running. The genetic memories of her ancestors rose up, showing him what a fully mature Dracora could do. They weren't peacekeepers because they were weak. They were peacekeepers because they were powerful enough that no one wanted to fight them. Ash roared, and the sound carried across electromagnetic frequencies that every ship could hear. She gathered energy from the Red Star itself, pulling in radiation and heat and converting it into raw power. Her body blazed like a miniature sun. Through their bond, Roy channeled that power, directing it with human precision and intent. They became a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had seen in 6 centuries. Ash's ancient strength combined with human adaptability and determination. The beam that erupted from them didn't just destroy Rand's corvette. It carved through 2 more ships behind him before dissipating into space. The remaining collective ships broke formation. Their confidence shattered. They had come expecting easy prey and found something that shouldn't exist. 4 bonded pairs, even with 3 being hours old, represented a threat they weren't prepared to face. The fleet retreated into hyperspace, leaving debris and bodies floating in the darkness. Roy sagged in his flight suit, exhausted beyond anything he had ever experienced. Ash was barely conscious, her enormous body limp as they drifted back toward Refuge Point. The battle had lasted 8 minutes. It felt like 8 hours. Director Oren's voice came through the comm. All defender ships return to base. Battle is over. We won. The celebration was muted. They had lost 11 ships and 23 people. Refuge Point bore scars from weapons impacts that would take months to repair. But they had survived. More importantly, the Dracora had survived. Roy met the other 3 bonded pairs in the medical bay while doctors checked them for injuries. 2 women and 1 man, all of them still in shock from the sudden formation of their bonds. Their dragons were tiny, fragile things that chirped and clung to their new partners with desperate trust. Ash moved among them carefully, projecting comfort and reassurance. She was teaching them, passing on knowledge through the same genetic memories that had taught her doctor. Ishin arrived on a transport ship 3 days later. She had left Gamma 7 the moment she heard about the battle. Tears streamed down her face when she saw Ash and the 3 hatchlings. I never thought I would see this. A new generation of Dracora. A new chance for the species. Over the following weeks, messages began arriving from across the galaxy. People who had found eggs and didn't know what to do with them. Ships that had carried strange cargo and experienced unusual energy readings. Each message represented another potential Dracora, another chance for the species to return from extinction. Roy stood in the observation deck and watched Ash teaching the younger dragons to fly in the void. They moved clumsily, their small wings struggling against vacuum, until Ash showed them how to use energy field for propulsion. It was beautiful and terrifying and full of hope. Director Oren joined him at the viewport. What will you do now? You could leave Refuge Point, travel the galaxy finding more eggs. Maybe eventually. But right now, this place needs defenders. Those hatchlings need time to grow. And I'm tired of running. Roy smiled as Ash performed a perfect loop through space, showing off for her students. Besides, I'm just a mechanic who picked up an egg nobody noticed. Seems like I should stick around and help build something worth protecting. The collective will come back. Let them. Next time, we'll be ready. Through his bond with Ash, Roy felt her agreement and pride. They had started as a frightened human and a helpless hatchling. They had become partners, defenders, and symbols of something the galaxy thought was lost forever. Hope didn't die easily. It endured in hidden eggs and desperate bonds, and people willing to fight for something greater than themselves. Ash called to him through their connection, inviting him to join her in space. Roy smiled and headed for his flight suit. They had work to do, more eggs to find, more people to teach, more chances to prove that compassion and connection were stronger than fear and control. The Dracora had returned to the galaxy. And this time, they weren't alone.